October 1817. Claremont House, England. A 21-year-old woman has been in labor for 50 hours. Her name is Princess Charlotte of Wales, heir to the British throne, granddaughter of King George III, and the hope of an entire nation. She's been screaming for 2 days straight. Outside her chamber, courtiers whisper. Some place bets on whether she'll survive the night. Others wager on the sex of the child. A few calculate how quickly the Prince Regent can remarry her husband if she dies. Inside, 5 male doctors stand around her bed. They refuse to examine her. Modesty, they claim. Protocol. The baby is stuck. Hour 51. The child is finally pulled out. A boy. Stillborn. Charlotte hemorrhages. Blood soaks through the sheets, pools on the floor, seeps between the floorboards. 6 hours later, she's dead. The nation mourns for a week. Then they start searching for her replacement. Between 1400 and 1800, 1 in every 3 European queens died from pregnancy-related causes. Not from war, not from poison, not from plague, from childbirth. But here's what the history books won't tell you. These weren't tragic accidents. This was systematic execution. Queens weren't chosen to rule. They were purchased to breed. Their bodies were state property. Their wombs were political assets. And when those wombs failed, or when their bodies simply gave out from being used over and over and over again, they were replaced. Catherine of Aragon. 6 pregnancies in 9 years. Body destroyed. Discarded. Jane Seymour. Gave Henry VIII his son. Dead 12 days later. Marie Antoinette. Forced to give birth in front of 200 people. Her screams entertainment for the court. Margaret of Scotland. Pregnant at 11. Dead at 13. These women were fed into a machine that ground them down until there was nothing left. And no one stopped it. Tonight you're going to hear their names. You're going to learn how they died. And you're going to discover why the men who killed them are still celebrated as great kings. This is the story they don't want you to know. Before a royal wedding, before the vows, before the ceremony that the public would witness, there was an examination. A physical inspection. Young girls, some barely into puberty, were stripped naked in front of royal physicians. Older women, matrons of the court, watched. Sometimes the king's advisors observed from behind screens. They checked everything. Breast development, hip width, evidence of menstruation, and then the invasive part, internal examinations to confirm virginity and assess the shape of the birth canal. They were looking for one thing. Could this girl's body produce heirs? If she passed, the marriage contract was signed. If she failed, she was sent home in disgrace. This wasn't marriage. This was livestock acquisition. The contracts made it explicit. In 1469, when Isabella of Castile married Ferdinand of Aragon, the terms were clear. She must produce a male heir within 10 years or the alliance would dissolve. In 1501, when Catherine of Aragon was shipped from Spain to England, her father negotiated a clause. If she failed to conceive within 3 years, Henry VII could annul the marriage and keep her dowry. These weren't romantic unions. They were breeding agreements with termination clauses. And the girls signing them? Most were between 12 and 14 years old. Take Margaret Beaufort, 1455. She's 12 years old, orphaned, wealthy, and strategically valuable. Edmund Tudor, 24 years old, claims her as his bride. The marriage is legal. The church approves. Her body hasn't even finished developing. He consummates the marriage immediately. She's pregnant within months. January 28, 1457. Margaret goes into labor. She's 13 years old. Her pelvis is too small. The baby, a boy, the future Henry VII, tears through her body on the way out. She survives. Barely. But the damage is catastrophic. Internal tearing. Nerve destruction. Possible fistula. A condition where the tissue between the birth canal and bladder is ripped apart, causing permanent incontinence. Margaret Beaufort lives to be 66 years old. She never has another child. Her body won't allow it. For 53 years, she lives with chronic pain from injuries sustained when she was 13. But Margaret's suffering wasn't an anomaly. it was protocol. The wedding night wasn't private. Witnesses, sometimes a dozen of them, stood outside the bedroom door. In some courts, they stood inside the room itself, watching from the corners. The next morning, the sheets were inspected. Blood was required. Proof of virginity. Proof of consummation. If there was no blood, the marriage could be annulled. The girl sent back. The alliance voided. The sheets were then displayed publicly. Hung from windows, paraded through courtyards, so the entire court could see that the deed was done. Within weeks, physicians monitored the new queen for signs of pregnancy. Her menstrual cycle was tracked, recorded, reported to the King's Council. If she menstruated, it was noted as a failure. The Catholic Church reinforced the system with doctrine. Procreation wasn't just expected. It was a holy commandment. Refusing your husband was a sin. Contraception was heresy. Suffering in childbirth was divine punishment for Eve's transgression in Eden. Queens were told their pain was God's will. Their duty was to endure. In 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council formally declared that marriage existed for one purpose: the production of legitimate heirs. Love was irrelevant. Consent was irrelevant. The woman's health was irrelevant. Only the heir mattered. And if no heir came, the contracts had clauses for that too. 3 years without a child? Annulment proceedings begin. 5 years? The king starts negotiating for a replacement bride. 7 years? You're called barren, cursed, defective. Catherine of Aragon learned this the hard way. After 18 years of marriage and 6 dead children, Henry VIII invoked his right to annul their union. He claimed her body was faulty, that God was punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. He remarried within months. Catherine died alone, discarded, 3 years later. This was the marriage contract: your body for political alliance, your life for an heir. And if your body broke under the strain, you were replaced. No exceptions, no mercy, just another name in the ledger of royal sacrifices. June 11, 1509. Catherine of Aragon, 23 years old, Princess of Spain, widow of Prince Arthur, marries Henry VIII in a private ceremony at Greenwich Palace. She's already been in England for 8 years, waiting, bargaining, trapped in political limbo after her first husband died. Now finally, she's Queen of England. The wedding night is consummated immediately. Within 6 weeks, she's pregnant. January 31st, 1510. Catherine gives birth to a daughter, stillborn. The court physicians examine the infant's body. They announce the cause: premature delivery. They blame Catherine's constitution. Henry says nothing publicly, but privately he's already worried. Catherine is 24 years old. She has 8 months to recover before Henry expects her to conceive again. She's pregnant by September. January 1st, 1511. New Year's Day. Catherine delivers a son. They name him Henry, after his father. England erupts in celebration. Bonfires, feasts, tournaments. The king hosts a joust where he rides as Sir Loyalheart in honor of his wife. For 52 days, Catherine is the most beloved woman in England. February 22nd, 1511. The baby dies. No explanation recorded. Possibly sudden infant death syndrome. Possibly infection. The celebrations stop. The court goes silent. Henry stops visiting Catherine's chambers. But the pregnancy machine doesn't stop. 1513. Catherine conceives again. Miscarriage. Second trimester. The fetus was male. 1514. Pregnant again. She goes into labor in December. A son. Born alive. He dies within hours. Unnamed. Buried quickly. 1516. Another pregnancy. This time Catherine carries to full term. February 18th. Greenwich Palace. A girl. Mary. She survives. But she's not a son. Henry's disappointment is immediate. He attends the christening, smiles for the court, and then begins sleeping with other women openly. Catherine is 30 years old. She's had 5 pregnancies in 7 years. Her body is breaking down. 1518. One more pregnancy. Catherine is desperate now. If she can deliver a son, she can secure her position. She can win back Henry's affection. She makes it to late term. November. Labor begins. The baby is stillborn. A daughter. Catherine hemorrhages for days. Court physicians work to stop the bleeding, but the damage is extensive. She survives, but something inside her body has ruptured permanently. The medical records from Catherine's later years describe chronic symptoms: continuous abdominal pain, irregular bleeding that lasted for weeks, difficulty walking, extreme fatigue. Modern historians analyzing these accounts believe she suffered from a prolapsed uterus, a condition where the uterus literally collapses into the vaginal canal from the strain of repeated pregnancies. There's also evidence of possible fistula formation, tears between the uterine wall and bladder, causing incontinence and infection. Her body was eating itself from the inside out. But the worst part? She kept trying. Between 1519 and 1525, Catherine may have had additional miscarriages that went unrecorded. Court observers noted she frequently claimed to be pregnant, only for nothing to come of it. By 1525, she's 40 years old, overweight from hormonal imbalance, in constant pain. Menstruation has stopped. Her childbearing years are over. Henry knows it. The court knows it. And now Catherine becomes disposable. Henry doesn't accuse her of infidelity. That would be too easy to disprove. Instead, he blames God. He claims their marriage was cursed from the beginning, that marrying his brother's widow violated divine law, that God punished him by killing his sons. He demands an annulment. Catherine refuses. She's been Queen of England for 18 years. She will not be erased. The fight drags on for 6 years. During that time, Henry moves Anne Boleyn into the palace. He stops speaking to Catherine. He strips her of her title. He forbids her from seeing their daughter Mary. 1533. Henry marries Anne Boleyn in secret. Catherine is exiled to Kimbolton Castle, a cold, damp fortress in the middle of nowhere. She's given a skeleton staff. Her income is slashed. Her letters are intercepted. She's a prisoner. January 7th, 1536. Catherine of Aragon dies at Kimbolton Castle. She's 50 years old. The official cause of death, heart failure. But when her body is embalmed, the physician makes a disturbing discovery. Catherine's heart is black, completely discolored, shriveled. He records it in his report. The heart was quite black and hideous to look at. Modern medical analysis suggests several possibilities: cancer, advanced infection from untreated fistula, or toxic poisoning from years of lead-based cosmetics. But there's another explanation: Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, also known as broken heart syndrome. Extreme emotional stress can literally damage the heart muscle. The chambers weaken. The tissue dies. Catherine spent the last 3 years of her life isolated, betrayed, separated from her daughter, and watching her legacy dismantled. Her body had already been destroyed by pregnancies. Her heart simply followed. Henry VIII attended her funeral. He wore yellow. Catherine of Aragon endured 6 confirmed pregnancies in 9 years. Her body was torn apart, bled dry, and discarded the moment it stopped producing sons. For almost 500 years, history has framed her as the bitter first wife, the obstacle to Henry's great love story with Anne Boleyn. But Catherine wasn't an obstacle. She was a victim, and her story has been buried under centuries of propaganda. If you believe these queens deserve to have their suffering remembered, not romanticized, not sanitized, but remembered, then hit that subscribe button right now. Every single one of you helps drag these women out of the historical darkness where they've been left to rot. Don't let Catherine's agony be forgotten. Subscribe. May 30th, 1536. 11 days after Anne Boleyn's execution, Henry VIII becomes engaged. Her name is Jane Seymour, 28 years old, pale, quiet, unremarkable. But she has one quality that matters. Her family has a history of producing sons. Henry's advisors have done their research. Jane comes from a large family. 10 siblings, 6 of them boys. Her mother had a strong constitution. No recorded miscarriages. Jane Seymour isn't chosen for her beauty or her intelligence. She's chosen because her bloodline breeds well. They marry on May 30th. Private ceremony. No celebration. Henry is 45 years old. Overweight. A festering ulcer on his leg that never heals. 2 failed marriages. 2 dead wives. Jane is his last hope for a legitimate male heir. The wedding night is consummated. Within days, the entire court is watching her for signs of pregnancy. By January 1537, Jane is confirmed pregnant. The court physicians take over immediately. She's moved to a specially prepared chamber. The windows are sealed with heavy tapestries to keep out drafts. Visitors are limited. Her diet is controlled. Everything she eats is monitored and recorded. Jane Seymour stops being a person. She becomes an incubator. For 9 months, she barely leaves her chambers. She's prodded, examined, prayed over. Astrologers calculate the most auspicious birth date. Physicians debate whether she's carrying a boy or girl based on the shape of her belly. Henry visits occasionally. He pats her stomach. He doesn't ask how she's feeling. October 9th, 1537. Hampton Court Palace. Jane's labor begins. Hour 1. Contractions start. The midwives are summoned. Hour 12. Labor intensifies. Jane is screaming. The baby isn't moving down. Hour 24. Something is wrong. The physicians are called in. The baby is breech. Feet first. In 1537, there are 2 options. Turn the baby manually, risking uterine rupture, or let nature take its course and hope the mother survives. The physicians choose option 3. They prioritize the baby. For 3 days and 3 nights, Jane Seymour labors at Hampton Court. The details are recorded in court documents. She's given no pain relief. Opium is considered too dangerous for the child. She's held down by attendants. The physicians use their hands, instruments, force. They are not trying to save Jane. They are trying to extract the air. October 12th, 1537. 2 o'clock in the morning. Prince Edward is born. Alive. Male. The entire palace erupts. Cannons fire from the Tower of London. Bells ring across England. Bonfires are lit in every town square. Henry VIII finally has his son. But in the birthing chamber, Jane is hemorrhaging. Blood soaks through the sheets. The midwives try to stop it, packing cloths, applying pressure, but the bleeding won't stop. Jane is conscious. She hears the celebrations outside. She knows she's dying. The physicians don't seem concerned. The baby is healthy. The priority has been achieved. By dawn, Jane develops a fever. Puerperal fever, childbed fever, an infection caused by bacteria entering the uterus during labor. In the 16th century, it's a death sentence. The infection spreads through her bloodstream. Her temperature climbs. She begins shaking uncontrollably. Rigors, the body's response to systemic infection. For 12 days, Jane Seymour lies in that bed, burning from the inside out. The court physicians try everything. Bloodletting, herbal poultices, prayers. Nothing works. October 24th, 1537. Midnight. Jane Seymour dies at Hampton Court Palace. She is 28 years old. She has been queen for 17 months. She has been a mother for 12 days. The official announcement praises her sacrifice. She gave England its prince. She fulfilled her duty. Henry orders a state funeral. But here's what the records also show. Within 2 weeks of Jane's death, Henry's advisors are already compiling a list of potential bride candidates. Within 6 months, negotiations begin with the Court of Cleves for wife number 4. Henry wears black for 3 months. Then he moves on. Jane Seymour is the only one of Henry's 6 wives buried beside him at Windsor Castle. Not because he loved her. Not because she was his favorite. But because she succeeded. She gave him a son. That's the only reason her body was deemed worthy of lying next to a king's. But here's the final, crushing irony. Prince Edward, the son Jane died to deliver, becomes King Edward VI at age 9. He rules for 6 years. At 15 years old, he contracts tuberculosis. July 6, 1553. Edward dies at Greenwich Palace. He never marries. He never has children. The Tudor male line, the bloodline Jane Seymour gave her life to secure, dies with him. Jane Seymour was ripped apart over 3 days of labor. She bled out for 12 days while an infection consumed her organs. She died believing her suffering had meaning, that her son would carry on the dynasty. He lived 15 years. Jane's sacrifice bought Henry VIII 15 years of a male heir. Then the whole thing collapsed anyway. They called her the successful wife. But success in this system still meant death. Let's talk about what actually happens when a woman dies in childbirth. Not the sanitized version. Not the tragic complications explanation you see in history books. The real thing. Puerperal fever. Childbed fever. In the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, it killed more royal women than any other single cause. Here's how it works. During labor, the cervix dilates. The uterine wall stretches. Tissue tears. Blood vessels rupture. The inside of a woman's body becomes an open wound. Now imagine the birthing chamber. 1600s. England. The physicians haven't washed their hands. They've just come from examining another patient, possibly a corpse in the morgue. Their instruments haven't been sterilized. There's no concept of germ theory. Bacteria doesn't exist in their understanding of medicine. They reach inside the birth canal with contaminated hands. Streptococcus bacteria, invisible, deadly, enters the uterus. Within hours, infection takes hold. Day 1, fever. The new mother feels warm. The midwives aren't worried yet. Day 2, the fever climbs to 104, 105 degrees. She's shaking uncontrollably. Rigors. Her body is fighting an invasion it can't see. Day 3. The infection spreads to her bloodstream. Sepsis. Her organs begin shutting down. Day 4. Delirium. She's hallucinating, thrashing. The physicians bleed her because in their minds, bad blood is the problem. They make it worse. Day 5 through 12. Slow, agonizing organ failure. Kidneys stop filtering. Lungs fill with fluid. Heart struggles to pump infected blood. Then death. 90% of women who contracted puerperal fever died. There was no cure, no treatment, no hope. Jane Seymour died this way. So did countless others. But infection wasn't the only killer. Hemorrhage, postpartum hemorrhage, uncontrolled bleeding after delivery, could kill a woman in minutes. The placenta detaches from the uterine wall. Blood vessels that fed the baby for 9 months are suddenly open, gushing. In a modern hospital, there are medications to make the uterus contract, emergency transfusions, surgical intervention. In 1500, in 1600, in 1700, midwives packed the vaginal canal with cloth. They pressed on the abdomen. They prayed. And they watched women bleed out on blood-soaked beds. Some women bled for hours. Some bled for days. Slower hemorrhages that weakened them until their hearts simply stopped. No blood transfusions existed. Once you lost enough blood, that was it. Your body shut down. Your brain stopped receiving oxygen. You died. Obstructed labor. This is what happened when the baby got stuck. For days, the baby's head is too large. The mother's pelvis is too narrow. The baby is breech sideways, tangled in the umbilical cord. And labor just stops progressing. In the 21st century, this means emergency cesarean section. In the 18th century, this meant death. Because here's what happens when a baby is stuck in the birth canal for days. The pressure cuts off blood flow to the surrounding tissue. The tissue dies. Necrosis. The dead tissue creates holes, fistulas, between the vaginal wall and the bladder, or between the vaginal wall and the rectum. If the woman survives, she's left incontinent. Urine or feces leak constantly through the openings. The smell is unbearable. She's socially isolated for the rest of her life. But most women didn't survive. The dead tissue became infected. Sepsis followed. And if the baby was still stuck, still alive inside her, the physicians would use hooks, metal instruments designed to crush the skull and extract the fetus piece by piece. No anesthesia. The mother was awake for all of it. Eclampsia. Pregnancy-induced hypertension that causes seizures. The warning signs: severe headaches, vision problems, swelling in the hands and face, sudden weight gain. In a modern hospital, eclampsia is managed with magnesium sulfate and early delivery. In the 1700s, there was no treatment. The seizures would start during labor. The woman's body would convulse violently. She'd bite through her tongue. Her brain would swell from the blood pressure spike. Some women seized for hours. Then they stroked out, or their hearts gave out, or they simply never regained consciousness. Their babies usually died with them. Prolapsed uterus. This is what happened to women who had too many pregnancies, too close together. The uterus, held in place by muscles and ligaments, begins to sag from repeated strain. Eventually, it collapses. The organ literally falls out of the body through the vaginal opening. Some women lived with partial prolapse for years. The uterus would bulge out during physical activity, then retreat back inside when they rested. Others experienced complete prolapse, the entire uterus hanging outside the body. The pain was excruciating. Walking became impossible. Infection was inevitable. And still, their husbands demanded more children. Then there's the cause of death that doesn't appear in medical records. Exhaustion. The human body can only take so much. Pregnancy depletes calcium from the bones and teeth. It taxes the cardiovascular system. It floods the body with hormones that affect every organ. 1 pregnancy is hard. 2 back-to-back is brutal. 6, 8, 10, the body simply gives up. Women died from heart failure in their 30s, from organ collapse, from systems that couldn't sustain one more pregnancy. They didn't die in childbirth. They died from being used up. November 5, 1817. Claremont House. Princess Charlotte of Wales goes into labor at 9 p.m. She's 21 years old. Healthy. First pregnancy. Everything seems fine. Hour 10. Progress slows. The baby isn't descending. Hour 20. Charlotte is exhausted. She begs for relief. There is none. Hour 30. Her physician, Sir Richard Croft, refuses to intervene. He won't use forceps. He won't perform an examination. Modesty and protocol forbid it. Hour 40. Charlotte is screaming. The baby still isn't moving. Hour 50. Finally, the baby emerges. A boy, stillborn. The umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck. Charlotte is hemorrhaging. Sir Richard Croft orders hot compresses. Brandy. Pressure on the abdomen. The bleeding doesn't stop. Hours pass. Charlotte is pale, cold, fading. 2 a.m. November 6th. Princess Charlotte dies from postpartum hemorrhage. She bled out over 6 hours while her doctor stood there and did nothing. But here's the part that reveals the true horror of royal childbirth. Sir Richard Croft was considered one of the best physicians in England. He had access to the latest medical knowledge, the best instruments, unlimited resources, and he still let her die. Why? Because male physicians in the 18th and 19th centuries refused to perform pelvic examinations. They considered it immodest, beneath their dignity. They would rather let a woman bleed to death than touch her. In many royal courts, experienced midwives, women who actually understood childbirth, were banned from attending queens. Only male physicians were allowed. Men who had never given birth, who had no practical experience, who saw women's bodies as theoretical puzzles rather than living, suffering human beings. And when those physicians experimented with new instruments, forceps, levers, hooks, they did so without anesthesia. Because women's pain didn't matter. Only the air mattered. And the daughters watched. Young princesses, 10 or 12 years old, stood outside their mothers' birthing chambers and listened to the screaming. They watched their mothers carried out on blood-soaked sheets. They attended the funerals. And then, a few years later, they were married off. And the cycle began again. Generational trauma, passed down through blood and terror. Every queen knew what awaited her. And there was no way out. May 16, 1770. A 14-year-old girl crosses the border from Austria into France. Her name is Maria Antonia. In a few hours, she'll be renamed Marie Antoinette. She's never met her husband. She's been coached on how to walk, how to speak, how to curtsy. Her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, has sent explicit instructions. Get pregnant immediately. The alliance between Austria and France depends on it. Marie Antoinette's body is now a political instrument. The wedding night happens at Versailles, May 16, 1770. Courtiers escort the 14-year-old bride and the 15-year-old groom to the marriage bed. They pull back the curtains. They watch. The next morning they inspect the sheets. No blood. Odd, but not alarming. Sometimes it takes a few attempts. Days pass. Weeks. Months. No pregnancy. By the end of the first year, the French court is whispering. By the end of the second year, the whispers become accusations. Is she barren? Is she defective? Did Austria send them damaged goods? By the third year, the Austrian ambassador is sending frantic letters back to Vienna. Maria Theresa writes to her daughter, demanding answers. Marie Antoinette, 16 years old, has to explain to her mother that the marriage hasn't been consummated. Not once in 3 years. The problem isn't Marie Antoinette. It's Louis. He has a medical condition, phimosis, a tightening of the foreskin that makes intercourse painful, sometimes impossible. It requires a minor surgical procedure. Simple, quick, but Louis is terrified. He refuses. For 7 years, the marriage remains unconsummated. And for 7 years, Marie Antoinette is blamed. Her menstrual cycles are tracked, recorded, reported to the king's ministers. When she menstruates, it's announced to the court. The queen has her indisposition. Everyone knows. Everyone counts the days. Pamphlets circulate in Paris calling her barren. Cartoons depict her as a dried-up tree. Poems mock her failure to produce an heir. The pressure is unrelenting. Marie Antoinette is 17, 18, 19 years old, and the entire nation is obsessed with her uterus. 1777. Marie's brother, Joseph II of Austria, visits Versailles. He takes Louis aside, man to man, emperor to king. The details of that conversation aren't recorded, but the result is, Louis finally agrees to the surgery. August 1777. The procedure is done. The marriage is consummated. Marie Antoinette is 21 years old. She's been married for 7 years. By December, she's pregnant. December 19, 1778. Versailles. Marie Antoinette goes into labor. But this isn't a private event. Royal births at Versailles are public spectacles. The doors to the birthing chamber are thrown open. Courtiers flood in, 200 of them. Nobles, ministers, servants, random spectators who've bribed their way inside. They crowd around the bed, pushing, shoving, trying to get a better view. The windows are opened so the crowds gathered outside in the courtyard can hear. The room is overheated. Fireplaces blazing. Bodies pressed together. No ventilation. Marie is in labor, exposed, surrounded by strangers. She's suffocating. The heat, the lack of air, the sheer number of people. She loses consciousness. Her physician, Vermond, panics. He grabs a pair of scissors and stabs them into the window seals, ripping the tapestries down to let air in. Marie revives. The labor continues. At 11:30 a.m., the baby is born. A girl. Marie Therese. The crowd disperses, disappointed. Not a son. But the baby machine has been activated. 1781. Marie gives birth again. This time a son. Louis Joseph. The Dauphin. Heir to the throne. France erupts in celebration. Marie Antoinette has finally fulfilled her purpose. 1785. Another pregnancy. Another son. Louis Charles. 1785. One more. A daughter. Sophie. For pregnancies in 8 years. Each one a public performance. Each birth attended by hundreds of witnesses. The physical toll is documented in letters and court records. Marie suffers from prolonged, difficult labors. Her recovery times are slow. She's frequently ill, fevers, weakness, exhaustion. There are hints of miscarriages between the recorded births. Pregnancies that ended early, quietly, hushed up to avoid political fallout. By her early 30s, Marie Antoinette looks older than her years. Paintings from the 1780s show a woman who's aged rapidly, heavier, tired, the youthful glow gone. Pregnancy after pregnancy has drained her. But the worst part isn't the physical damage. It's the political weaponization. When Marie failed to produce a son immediately, she became a target. Pamphlets in Paris accused her of affairs, lesbianism, incest, anything to explain why the Austrian woman wasn't pregnant. When she finally did have children, the propaganda shifted. Now her sons were called illegitimate. Rumors spread that they weren't Louis's children. Her body, her fertility, her children. All of it became ammunition. The revolution didn't start because of Marie Antoinette's pregnancies. But her failure to produce a male heir quickly enough gave her enemies the opening they needed. She was already hated as a foreigner. Add Baron to the list, and she became expendable. 1789. The revolution begins. 1789. The royal family is imprisoned. Marie Antoinette's children, the ones she nearly died delivering, are taken from her. Her eldest son, Louis Joseph, the Dauphin, had already died in 1789 at age 7. Tuberculosis. Her second son, Louis Charles, is separated from her in 1793. He's 8 years old. He's placed in a cell alone. Abused. Starved. Tortured. June 8, 1795. Louis Charles dies in prison. He's 10 years old. Marie Antoinette never sees him again after their separation. She goes to the guillotine not knowing if her son is dead or alive. Marie Antoinette gave birth in front of 200 people. Her body was examined, discussed, and judged by an entire nation. She was blamed for a medical problem that wasn't hers. Humiliated for 7 years. Forced to perform her fertility for public consumption. And when the revolution came, her children, the ones she'd suffered to bring into the world, were used as pawns, then discarded. Her son died alone in a prison cell at age 10. History remembers Marie Antoinette as the queen who said, "Let them eat cake." She never said that. It's a myth, a lie. But the lie is more famous than the truth. The truth is that Marie Antoinette was a 14-year-old girl sold into a marriage she didn't choose, blamed for a problem that wasn't her fault, forced to give birth in front of strangers, and ultimately executed while her children were tortured. That's the real story. But for 200 years, history turned her into a joke. A meme. A punchline. If you think these queens deserve better than to be reduced to myths and propaganda. If you think their real suffering matters more than the lies told about them, then subscribe to Throne of Lies right now. Every subscription is a vote for the truth. Help us rewrite the narrative. August 23, 1498. Zaragoza, Spain. A 19-year-old woman has been in labor for 18 hours. Her name is Isabella of Aragon, Princess of Spain, Queen of Portugal. She was married at 18, pregnant within months. Now, a year later, she's dying on a birthing bed. The baby is stillborn, a son. Isabella hemorrhages for hours. The physicians can't stop it. By evening, she's dead. 19 years old. 1 year of marriage. 1 pregnancy. 1 corpse. She's not the only one. September 13, 1409. Blois, France. Isabella of Valois, Queen of England, widow of King Richard II, dies in childbirth. She's 19 years old. But here's the detail that matters. Isabella was married at age 6 years old. Sent to England as a child bride to secure a peace treaty between France and England. She lived in the English court for years, waiting. A child playing dress-up as queen. Richard II died when she was 10. She was sent back to France. At 17, she was remarried, this time to Charles, Duke of Orleans. At 19, she was pregnant. At 19, she was dead. These weren't isolated tragedies. These were the expected outcomes. 1237. Ponthieu, France. Joan of England, daughter of King John, is married to Ferdinand III of Castile. She's 10 years old. The marriage is consummated when she reaches puberty. Around age 12, maybe 13. She's pregnant immediately. 1237. Joan goes into labor. She's 13 years old. Her pelvis hasn't finished developing. The birth canal is too narrow. The baby can't pass through. Labor goes on for days. Joan dies. The baby dies with her. 13 years old. 1275. Roxburgh Castle, Scotland. Margaret of Scotland, daughter of King Alexander III, is married to Eric II of Norway. She's 11 years old. The marriage is political. Norway needs an alliance. Scotland needs trade routes. Margaret's body is the bargaining chip. By age 12, she's living in Norway. By age 13, she's pregnant. 1275. Margaret dies from childbirth complications. She's 13 years old. Her daughter survives, also named Margaret, later called the Maid of Norway. That child dies at age 7 during a sea voyage to Scotland. Both dead before age 14. The name Blanche of Castile appears repeatedly in medieval records. Multiple queens. Multiple regions. Multiple deaths. What they have in common. They all died young. They all died from childbirth. Blanche of Castile, Queen of France. Married at 12. Died at 23 after her 9th pregnancy. Blanche of Bourbon, Queen of Castile. Married at 16. Died at 22, possibly from complications after miscarriage. The name became almost synonymous with young royal death. This wasn't bad luck. This was the system working exactly as designed. Canon law, the legal code of the Catholic Church, set the minimum marriage age at 12 for girls, 14 for boys. Not because 12-year-olds were emotionally or physically ready for marriage, but because that's roughly when girls begin menstruating. And menstruation meant fertility. And fertility meant breeding potential. The moment a girl's body could theoretically become pregnant, she could be married off. No exceptions. No consideration for whether her body was actually developed enough to survive pregnancy. Just, can she bleed? Then she can breed. Here's the biological reality they ignored. A girl's pelvis doesn't finish developing until her late teens or early 20s. At age 12, 13, 14, the pelvic bones are still growing. The birth canal is narrow. The surrounding muscles and ligaments are underdeveloped. When a 13-year-old body tries to give birth, the consequences are catastrophic. Obstructed labor almost guaranteed. The baby gets stuck. Fistulas, tears between the vaginal wall and bladder or rectum, extremely common. Hemorrhage, uncontrolled bleeding from tissue that hasn't finished developing, frequent and fatal. Pelvic fractures, bones breaking under the pressure of labor, not uncommon. If the girl survives, she's often left permanently damaged. Infertile, incontinent, in chronic pain for the rest of her life. If she doesn't survive, which happens in roughly 40% of cases, she dies screaming. They knew this. Medieval and Renaissance physicians documented the dangers of early pregnancy. Records from the 1200s onward mention the high death rates among teenage mothers. But the system didn't change. Because the girls were expendable. There were always more princesses, more noble daughters, more child brides ready to replace the ones who died. Let's go back to Margaret Beaufort. We talked about her earlier, but let's look at the full damage. 1455. Margaret is 12 years old. Married to Edmund Tudor, age 24. He consummates the marriage immediately. She's pregnant by autumn. January 28, 1457. Margaret goes into labor at Pembroke Castle. She's 13 years old. Her feet 11 inches tall. Less than 90 pounds. The baby, the future Henry VII, is a normal-sized infant. He doesn't fit. The labor lasts for hours, possibly days. The records aren't clear. What is clear? The damage is catastrophic. Margaret's pelvis fractures. The tissue between her birth canal and bladder tears, a fistula. Nerve damage. Massive internal bleeding. She survives. The baby survives. But Margaret Beaufort will never have another child. Not by choice. Her body can't do it. The physicians examine her afterward. The uterine damage is too severe. Another pregnancy would kill her. She's 13 years old, and her reproductive life is over. Margaret lives to age 66. That means she spends 53 years living with the consequences of that single childbirth. Chronic pain from the pelvic fractures. Incontinence from the fistula. Scarring. Infections. For 53 years, every day, she feels the aftermath of what was done to her body when she was 13. She becomes one of the most powerful women in England. Mother of the king, political strategist, patron of education. But her body never recovers. And here's the part that makes it worse. Margaret Beaufort herself, decades later, arranges marriages for other young girls. Girls who are 12, 13, 14 years old. She knows what happened to her. She knows what will happen to them. But she arranges the marriages anyway. Because that's how the system perpetuates itself. The victims become enforcers. The survivors pass the trauma down. Generational horror, encoded in law and custom. Between 1200 and 1500, an estimated 40% of royal teenage brides died from pregnancy-related causes. Not 4%. Not 14%. 40%. Nearly half. Hundreds of girls. 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. Married off, impregnated, and dead within a year or two. Their names fill the genealogical records. Brief entries. Born. Married. Died in childbirth. One line. That's all they get. Most of them didn't even make it to 20. This wasn't tragedy. This was policy. This was the deliberate sacrifice of children for political alliances and dynastic succession. And it continued for centuries. Because queens were replaceable. But heirs were essential. January 29, 1536. Greenwich Palace. Anne Boleyn is 4 months pregnant. She's been queen for 3 years. She's already given Henry VIII one daughter, Elizabeth. But Henry wants a son. This pregnancy is her last chance. January 29th. Anne receives news that Henry has been thrown from his horse during a jousting tournament. He's unconscious. For hours, no one knows if he'll survive. Anne is hysterical. Terrified. She's 4 months pregnant and the father of her child might be dead. 2 days later, she miscarries. A male fetus. Developed enough that the sex is identifiable. The one thing Henry wanted most. Gone. But here's what the history books don't tell you. This wasn't Anne Boleyn's first miscarriage. It was her third. And became pregnant 5 times during her marriage to Henry VIII. September 1533. Elizabeth. Born healthy. Survives. Summer 1534. Miscarriage. Early term. Barely recorded. 1535. Possible miscarriage. The dates are unclear. Some historians think she was pregnant and lost it before the court even knew. January 1536. Miscarriage. Male fetus. For months gestation. 1536. Claimed to be pregnant again in April. Possibly another early miscarriage. 5 pregnancies in 3 years. 1 surviving child. For losses. And every single one of those losses was treated as Anne's personal failure. After the January 1536 miscarriage, the male fetus, Henry's attitude shifts immediately. He stops visiting her chambers. He stops speaking to her in public. Within weeks, he's already moving on to Jane Seymour. Within months, and is arrested. Charged with adultery, incest, treason, charges that are almost certainly fabricated. May 19, 1536. Anne Boleyn is beheaded. She's 29 years old. Her crime, according to the real subtext of her execution. She couldn't produce a living son. Anne Boleyn is famous. Her execution is one of the most well-known events in Tudor history. But the miscarriages? The pregnancy losses that led to her downfall? Those get buried in footnotes. Because miscarriages don't count. Stillbirths don't count. Babies who died within hours or days don't count. Only living, legitimate sons count. Everything else is erased. Catherine Howard. Henry VIII, 5th wife. Married at 19. Executed at 19. The official charges: adultery, premarital sexual relations, treason. But there's another detail hidden in the records. In late 1541, a few months before her arrest, Catherine's ladies-in-waiting reported she was feeling ill, nauseous, fatigued. Some historians believe she was pregnant. If she miscarried before the arrest. There's no official record, no documentation, just a young woman's body failing her under pressure, and then an X. Go back further. Catherine of Aragon. We already covered her 6 confirmed pregnancies. 6 children, 5 dead, but the records suggest there were more. At least 3 or 4 additional miscarriages. Early term, quickly buried. Literally and figuratively. The court doctors recorded the Queen's indisposition. Vague language. Could mean menstruation. Could mean miscarriage. Historians analyzing the timelines believe Catherine was pregnant, or thought she was pregnant, at least 9 or 10 times during her marriage. 6 documented births. 3 to 4 probable miscarriages. That's 9 or 10 pregnancies in 18 years. Her body was a war zone. Why did they miscarry so often? Start with the medical reality. There was no prenatal care, no vitamins, no ultrasounds, no monitoring, no bed rest protocols. Queens were expected to maintain full court schedules while pregnant, standing for hours during ceremonies, traveling in carriages over rough roads, attending feasts where they were pressured to eat and drink excessively. Then there's the beauty standards. Lead-based makeup, mercury treatments, arsenic complexion wafers. We know from modern toxicology that lead crosses the placental barrier. It accumulates in fetal tissue. It causes miscarriage, stillbirth, and developmental defects. Queens were poisoning themselves and their unborn children to maintain pale skin and a flawless complexion. Then add malnutrition. Constant pregnancies deplete the body's calcium, iron, and essential nutrients. Without recovery time, the mother's body starts cannibalizing itself to sustain the fetus. By the 3rd, 4th, 5th pregnancy, there's nothing left. The fetus doesn't develop properly. It dies in the womb, miscarriage. But the medical causes were only part of it. The psychological destruction was just as deadly. Miscarriages were treated as personal failures, moral failures. The church taught that miscarriage was God's punishment for sin, for impure thoughts, for insufficient piety. Queens who miscarried were told they weren't praying hard enough, that God was withholding his blessing because they were unworthy. The guilt was crushing, and the political consequences were immediate. A miscarriage meant weakness. It meant the queen's body was defective. It gave the king grounds to replace her. So some queens hid their miscarriages. They bled in private. They disposed of the evidence themselves. They told no one. Better to suffer in silence than give your husband an excuse to discard you. And when the miscarriages or stillbirths couldn't be hidden, the evidence was disposed of quickly. Miscarried fetuses, especially early-term ones, were buried without ceremony, often without names, sometimes without coffins, just wrapped in cloth and placed in unmarked graves. The goal was to erase the evidence, to pretend it never happened. Stillborn babies, full-term infants who died during or just after birth, got slightly better treatment. A quick baptism if the priest arrived in time. A small funeral, a brief prayer, then burial, fast, quiet. The records were often destroyed or lost, because every pregnancy loss was a political liability, a reminder of failure. Better to erase it entirely. Then there were the phantom pregnancies, the ones that were never real to begin with. Mary I, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII, first child, became queen in 1553. She was 37 years old, unmarried, desperate for an heir. 1554. Mary announces she's pregnant. Her abdomen swells. She feels movement. She reports symptoms of pregnancy. Physicians confirm it. The court prepares for a royal birth. Months pass. The due date comes and goes. No baby. Mary's abdomen remains swollen. She insists she's still pregnant, that the due date was calculated wrong. More months pass. Still no baby. Eventually, the swelling goes down. The pregnancy disappears. It was a phantom pregnancy, pseudocyesis, a psychological condition where the body mimics pregnancy symptoms due to intense emotional desire or pressure. Mary was so desperate to produce an heir, so traumatized by the pressure, that her body manufactured a fake pregnancy. 1557. It happens again. Mary announces she's pregnant. Same symptoms, same swelling, same certainty. No baby. She dies in 1558, childless, her body destroyed by the psychological torture of the breeding machine. But the darkest possibility is this. Some historians believe certain queens were deliberately overworked, stressed, or poisoned to induce miscarriage. If a king wanted to replace his wife, but couldn't fabricate grounds for annulment or execution, he could simply wait for her to miscarry, then blame her for it, keep her constantly pregnant, keep her exhausted, deny her rest, expose her to stress. Eventually, her body would fail. Assassination by pregnancy. No blood, no scandal, just a tragic loss. Here's the statistical reality. For every recorded royal live birth in the medieval and Renaissance periods, historians estimate there were 2 to 3 pregnancy losses, miscarriages, stillbirths, infant deaths within the first week. That means the real body count is 3 times higher than what's recorded. Catherine of Aragon didn't have 6 pregnancies. She had 9 or 10. And Boleyn didn't have 1 child. She had 5 pregnancies. Multiply that across every queen, every noble woman, every royal mistress for 500 years. Thousands of dead fetuses. Thousands of stillborn infants. Thousands of babies who lived for hours or days before dying from infections, deformities, or simply being born too weak to survive. And none of them are counted. None of them are memorialized. They're just erased from history. The death toll isn't just the queens who died in childbirth. It's the thousands of pregnancies that never made it to childbirth. The invisible massacre. The bodies buried in unmarked graves. The grief that was never allowed to be spoken. Because those babies weren't heirs. So they didn't matter. Death wasn't always the worst outcome. Sometimes surviving was worse. Eleanor of Castile, Queen of England, wife of Edward I, married at age 10 in 1254, first pregnancy at 14. Between 1255 and 1284, Eleanor gives birth 16 times. 16 pregnancies in 29 years. She survives all of them. But here's what the survival cost her. Chronic fistulas. Multiple ones. Tears between the vaginal wall and the bladder. Between the vaginal wall and the rectum. Urine leaks constantly. Feces leak constantly. There's no surgical repair available in the 13th century. No treatment. No cure. Eleanor of Castile spends the last decades of her life smelling of waste. The odor is inescapable. She bathes multiple times a day. She changes clothes constantly. Nothing helps. Courtiers avoid her. Servants whisper. She's moved to separate chambers, away from the main court. Social isolation becomes her reality. She's the Queen of England, and she lives like a leper. 1290. Eleanor dies at age 49 while traveling with Edward. The official cause? Fever, possibly from infection. But the real cause is decades of untreated internal injuries. Her body finally gave out. Edward famously erects 12 memorial crosses marking the route her funeral procession takes back to London. The Eleanor crosses. Romantic. Devoted. A love story for the ages. But those crosses don't memorialize love. They memorialize what Edward's need for heirs did to her body. 16 pregnancies. 30 years of leaking waste. Decades of isolation and humiliation. That's what the crosses really commemorate. And of Austria, Queen of France, wife of Louis XIII, married in 1615 at age 14. For 23 years, she fails to produce an heir. For miscarriages, possibly more. Years of humiliation. The French court calls her barren, defective, cursed. Louis XIII barely speaks to her. He visits her chambers only when pressured by ministers desperate for succession. 1638. And is 37 years old. She becomes pregnant. Against all odds, she carries to term. September 5th, 1638. She gives birth to a son, the future Louis XIV. France celebrates. Finally, an heir. The dynasty is saved. Anne's body is destroyed. The labor lasts over 24 hours. At age 37, after decades of miscarriages and reproductive trauma, her body barely functions. Massive tearing, hemorrhaging, infection. She survives, but the damage is permanent. Chronic pelvic pain, difficulty walking, recurring infections that flare up for the rest of her life. 1640. Anne becomes pregnant again. One more son, Philippe. After that second birth, her health collapses entirely. She spends the next 20 years in declining health. Weak, exhausted, in constant pain. 1666. Anne of Austria dies at age 65. The official cause, breast cancer. But the underlying cause is 40 years of reproductive trauma that destroyed her immune system, her hormonal balance, and her body's ability to heal. Maria Theresa of Spain, Queen of France, wife of Louis XIV, the son and of Austria, nearly died delivering. The cycle continues. Maria Theresa marries Louis XIV in 1660. She's 21 years old. Between 1661 and 1672, she has 6 pregnancies. 6 children in 11 years. Only one survives to adulthood. By age 33, Maria Theresa looks 50. Her teeth are gone. All of them. Lost to calcium depletion from constant pregnancy and poor nutrition. She's exhausted. Chronically ill. Rapid aging from hormonal collapse. She gains weight, her body desperately trying to store resources that keep getting drained by pregnancy. Louis XIV loses interest. He takes mistresses openly. Flaunts them at court. Maria Theresa becomes irrelevant. A used-up vessel. 1683. Maria Theresa dies at age 44. An abscess on her arm becomes infected. Sepsis. Death. But the infection only killed her because her body had nothing left to fight with. 6 pregnancies in 11 years had stripped her immune system to nothing. The medical aftermath of survival was brutal. Permanent incontinence. Urine leaking. Feces leaking. No control. Prolapsed organs. The uterus sagging, falling, sometimes hanging outside the body. Chronic infections. Urinary tract infections, kidney infections, uterine infections that recurred constantly. Nerve damage. Pain shooting down the legs. Numbness. Loss of sensation. Fistulas that never healed. Openings between organs that leaked fluid, waste, and infection. And PTSD. Though they didn't have a name for it. Flashbacks to the labor. Nightmares. Anxiety attacks at the thought of becoming pregnant again. Depression. The crushing weight of watching your body fall apart while everyone around you pretends not to notice. But the physical damage was only half of it. Once a queen's breeding years ended, she became expendable. Kings moved on to younger women, mistresses, second wives. The queen was moved to separate chambers, isolated, forgotten. She'd spent decades destroying her body to produce heirs, and her reward was abandonment. Court life continued without her. Decisions were made without consulting her. Her opinions became irrelevant. She was a ghost in her own palace. And the guilt, survivor's guilt. Queens who lived watched other queens die. Their friends, their sisters, their daughters, dead from the same system that had merely maimed them instead of killed them. Why did I survive when she didn't? What's wrong with me that I'm still here? Should I have died instead? The psychological toll was immense. Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, Queen of England, wife of George III. Married in 1761 at age 17. Between 1762 and 1783, Charlotte has 15 pregnancies. 13 children survive to adulthood. By any measure, Charlotte is a successful breeding machine. She fulfilled her duty. She produced heirs and spares and backups for the backups. But here's what success looks like. 1788. Charlotte is 44 years old. She begins showing signs of mental deterioration, paranoia, mood swings, erratic behavior. The court physicians attribute it to hysteria, women's problems. But modern medical analysis suggests something else. Postpartum psychosis that was never treated, compounded by decades of hormonal chaos from 15 pregnancies. Her mental state worsens over the years. 1810s. Charlotte is in her 60s. Her behavior becomes increasingly erratic. She isolates herself, refuses to see people, talks to herself. Some historians believe she was suffering from undiagnosed postpartum depression that lasted for decades. Others think it was early-onset dementia, accelerated by the physical trauma of 15 pregnancies. 1818. Charlotte dies at age 74. She spent the last decade of her life mentally deteriorating, increasingly isolated, a shell of who she'd been. 15 pregnancies, 13 surviving children, and her reward was madness. These women didn't die in childbirth. But they didn't really survive either. They lived in permanent agony, physical, psychological, social. Their bodies were ruins. Their minds were shattered. Their lives were hollow. They watched themselves fall apart in slow motion. And they were expected to smile, to be grateful, to accept their suffering as duty. Death in childbirth was quick. Hours, maybe days. Then it was over. But survival meant decades of pain, decades of incontinence, decades of being discarded and forgotten, decades of living in a body that had been used up and thrown away while you were still inside it. Sometimes the ones who died were the lucky ones. Here's the question nobody asks. Why didn't they just stop? If pregnancy was killing them, if they knew it was killing them, why didn't they refuse? The answer is simple. They couldn't. Let's start with the legal reality. Queens had zero reproductive rights. None. Marriage law across Europe was explicit. A wife's body belonged to her husband. Refusing conjugal relations was grounds for annulment. An annulment meant total destruction. Loss of title, loss of income, loss of children. Any existing children would stay with the father. Exile, imprisonment, in some cases execution. Catherine of Aragon tried to refuse annulment. She spent her final years locked in a crumbling castle, separated from her daughter, stripped of everything. That's what happened when you said no. Then there's the religious trap. The Catholic Church, which controlled marriage law, inheritance law, and moral authority across Christian Europe, had very clear doctrine. Procreation was a sacred duty, the primary purpose of marriage. Contraception was a mortal sin. Using any method to prevent pregnancy meant eternal damnation. And suffering in childbirth? That was God's will. Genesis 3 verse 16. God's punishment for Eve's sin. I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you shall bring forth children. Pain wasn't a medical problem to be solved. It was divine justice. Queens were taught from childhood that their suffering was holy, that enduring it proved their virtue, that complaining about it was sinful. You were supposed to accept the pain, welcome it, offer it up to God. To refuse pregnancy was to refuse God's plan. But beyond law and religion, there was raw political necessity. Dynasties depended on heirs, male heirs specifically. Without sons, kingdoms fell into succession crises. Civil wars, foreign invasions. The War of the Roses, 30 years of brutal civil war in England, happened because of succession disputes. The Spanish Succession War, the Austrian Succession War, conflicts that killed hundreds of thousands, all because of missing heirs. So when a queen's body was breaking down from pregnancy after pregnancy, when she was begging for rest, when physicians were warning that another pregnancy would kill her, the answer was always the same: we need an heir. Your life is less important than political stability. And if a queen did die, if her body finally gave out, the physicians never blamed the system. They blamed her body, defective womb, weak constitution, unbalanced humors. insufficient piety. Medieval and Renaissance medicine was built on the idea that women's bodies were inherently flawed, inferior versions of male bodies. When something went wrong, it was always the woman's fault. Too cold, too hot, too moist, too dry. Doctors prescribed treatments that made things worse. Bloodletting that weakened already exhausted bodies. Mercury that poisoned both mother and fetus. Experimental surgeries without anesthesia. And through it all, they never questioned whether forcing women into continuous pregnancy might be the problem. The system was perfect. The women were broken. There was also the economic trap. Queens had no independent income, no property rights, no ability to leave. Everything they wore, everything they ate, the roof over their heads, all of it belonged to the king. If you defied your husband, he could cut you off entirely. No money, no home, no support. Where would you go? Back to your birth family, who would be humiliated by your failure and might refuse to take you in. To a convent, where you'd live in poverty and isolation. There was no escape route. Financial dependence meant total vulnerability. And even if a queen wanted to resist, she couldn't do it in private. Royal women lived under constant surveillance. Ladies-in-waiting attended them at all times. Servants monitored their movements. Physicians tracked their menstrual cycles. Every moment was observed. Every conversation was reported. If a queen tried to use contraception, herbal remedies, barrier methods, anything, someone would notice. If she tried to refuse her husband's advances, the entire court would know by morning. Privacy didn't exist. Your body wasn't your own. Your choices weren't your own. You were state property, monitored and controlled at all times. Meanwhile, the propaganda machine worked overtime. Motherhood was glorified. Portraits showed queens surrounded by healthy children, glowing with maternal virtue. The deaths were sanitized. Died in childbed became a noble sacrifice, not a preventable tragedy. Churches commissioned paintings of the Virgin Mary, holding the infant Jesus, the ultimate model of perfect, painless motherhood. Poems praised queens who died delivering sons. They were called martyrs, heroes. The message was clear: your suffering is beautiful. Your death is meaningful. Your pain is your greatest achievement. And if you believe that, if you internalize that message, then resisting seems selfish, cowardly, sinful. This conditioning started in childhood. Little girls born into royal families were raised knowing their fate. They watched their mothers go through pregnancy after pregnancy. They attended the births. They saw the blood, the screaming, the exhaustion. And they were told, this will be your life too. There were no alternative narratives. No examples of women who chose differently and thrived. Every story ended the same way: marriage, pregnancy, duty. By the time these girls were 12 or 13 and being married off, they'd already accepted it. This is just what happens to women. This is normal. And what about the men? The kings whose need for heirs drove this machine? They faced zero consequences. If a wife died in childbirth, the king remarried, often within months. If a wife couldn't produce a son, the king blamed her, defective womb, and moved on to the next one. Henry VIII had 6 wives. 2 executed. 2 divorced. 1 died in childbirth. 1 survived him. He killed or discarded 5 women in his quest for a male heir. He's remembered as a great king. A king's fertility was never questioned. If pregnancies failed, it was the woman's fault. Always. Medical science didn't acknowledge that male fertility issues existed. Didn't acknowledge that genetic problems could come from the father. Didn't acknowledge that repeated pregnancies with the same man suggested maybe he was the problem. No. The man was always virile, always potent, always blameless. The women were disposable. So why didn't they stop? Because stopping meant annulment, exile, imprisonment, or death. Because the church said their suffering was holy. Because kingdoms depended on their compliance. Because doctors gaslit them into believing their bodies were the problem. Because they had no money and nowhere to go. Because they were watched every second of every day. Because propaganda told them their pain was noble. Because they were conditioned from birth to accept it. And because the men who controlled their lives faced no consequences for using them up and throwing them away. That's why they couldn't stop. The system wasn't broken. It was designed exactly this way. Let's count the dead. Between 1400 and 1800, 400 years of European monarchy, an estimated 30 to 40% of queens died from pregnancy-related causes. Not 3%, not 10%, 30 to 40%. Nearly half. At least 50 documented queen deaths directly from childbirth. 50 names we know. Jane Seymour, Isabella of Aragon, Charlotte of Wales, Joan of England, Margaret of Scotland. 50 women who had titles, portraits, official records. But they're just the ones important enough to be recorded. What about the others? The noble women, the princesses, the duchesses, the royal mistresses. Hundreds of them died the same way. No portraits, no monuments, no memorial crosses, just brief entries in church registries. Died in childbed. One line. That's all they get. Their names are lost. Their stories are erased. But they died screaming just the same. And the children. Thousands of infants died with their mothers or within days of birth. Stillborn. Born too weak. Born too early. Born to mothers whose bodies had nothing left to give. The ripple effect of this system wasn't just dead queens. It was dead children. Motherless children. Entire families destroyed. Dynasties that collapsed despite all the sacrifice. All those deaths, and half the time there was no surviving heir anyway. You might think this is ancient history. A relic of medieval barbarism that we've moved past. But maternal mortality still kills more than 800 women every single day worldwide. That's 295,000 women per year, dying from preventable pregnancy complications. Reproductive coercion, forcing women to have children against their will or before their bodies are ready, still exists. Child marriage still exists in 20 countries. Girls as young as 12 still being sold into marriages, still getting pregnant, still dying. The machinery is still running. It's just moved to different parts of the world. And even in the countries where maternal mortality is low, the historical erasure continues. Walk into any museum. Look at the paintings of kings and queens. The kings are shown in armor, commanding armies, signing treaties. The queens? Holding babies, surrounded by children, glowing with maternal virtue. Their deaths are footnotes. Died 1537. No details. No context. The history books call it tragedy. Noble sacrifice. The price of duty. They romanticize it. Sanitize it. Strip away the blood and the screaming and the terror. They turn systematic murder into a love story. Because that's what this was. Not tragic accidents. Not unfortunate complications. Systematic murder through forced reproduction. These women were killed by a system that valued their wombs more than their lives. A system that replaced them when their bodies broke down. A system that erased their suffering and called it glory. Behind every glorious dynasty, every powerful kingdom, every celebrated royal lineage, are the corpses of the women who built it. The Tudors? Built on the bodies of Catherine of Aragon, and Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Catherine Howard, Catherine Parr. The Bourbons? Built on Marie Antoinette, and of Austria, Maria Theresa. The Plantagenets? Eleanor of Castile and dozens more. Every throne in Europe is a graveyard. That's the truth Throne of Lies is here to tell. Not the sanitized version. Not the romantic myth. The truth. The blood-soaked, bone-crushing, soul-destroying truth. Hundreds of queens died screaming in agony. Their bodies were used up and thrown away like broken tools. And for 500 years, history buried them in footnotes. Erased their suffering. Turned their deaths into romantic tragedy. Made them disappear. If you made it to the end of this video, you know the truth now. You've heard their names. You've seen what was done to them. And now you have a choice. You can close this video, scroll away, and let them stay forgotten. Let history keep lying about them. Let their suffering remain buried. Or, you can hit that subscribe button right now. You can help Throne of Lies drag these stories into the light where they belong. We need to keep making these videos. To keep exposing the lies that history tells about power, about glory, about the great kings who built their legacies on women's corpses. Every queen in this video died believing her pain didn't matter, believing she was just doing her duty, believing her suffering would be forgotten. Prove them wrong. Show them that their pain mattered, that their lives mattered, that their deaths weren't just footnotes in someone else's story. Subscribe to Throne of Lies. Help us make sure no one ever forgets what was done to them. They died screaming. The least we can do is make sure someone hears them.